Well, good morning again. It's so great to be here. What great weather we've been having lately. And it's just great to see the body and be with the body and celebrate with the body. And today we're continuing a sermon series that we started last week called Tough Topics. And the reality is this: I think there's some stuff within the church we just don't talk about. We don't talk about it for several reasons, but I think just sometimes it's just a tough topic, and we let other people address it rather than addressing it with grace and truth that I think we need to. I think we need to have tough conversations, even from the pulpit, about things, about different things. Last week we talked about self-worth. And while that may not seem like a tough topic for everyone, the fact of the matter is I think we sometimes struggle, as I said last week, with identifying our self-worth. We built our self-worth out of other things: how big our bank account is, what our positions of power are, how respected we may be, and we build our self-worth upon that. And last week we talked about that our self-worth comes from none of that. It comes from Jesus, and how he bought us. He paid a price for us with his death on the cross because we are so invaluable to him. And just how important that is to recognize. Well, this week, we're going to continue to, and I do want to say this, like I realized last week, some of you, that wasn't a tough topic for you maybe, and so you're like, is this really going to be? This week, we're going to talk about addiction. And when I say that, I know that last week's self-worth might not have been a tough topic for some of you, but this week, I think this tough topic of addiction, I would say it affects 95% people in this church. And the 5% that would say it doesn't affect them just don't realize how it affects them. The truth of the matter is, I think we all know someone in our lives, or maybe it's us, who struggles with addiction. We all have someone, a person, a family member, a child, a parent, a neighbor, a friend, whoever, who struggles with addiction. And I think for some of us, it's even us in this room. Because we're going to talk about, oftentimes when we think about addiction, we think about people who may be addicted to things that we're not addicted to, not recognizing our own addiction in our lives. That it could be the Amazon shopping site for some of us. It could be the food that we eat for some of us. It could be we're addicted to our work. There are lots of other things that I think fuels into this. And so I do think that this is a tough topic that affects every single one of us. And what's amazing is, even though this is a tough topic that affects, I think, every single one of us, what we normally do is two things. We tell people to either just pray about it, or we let other people handle it. And we take the responsibility of helping other people through addiction, and we give it over to other people. Well, we as a church kind of take a back seat. And I think that's got to change. And I think that changes by beginning to have a conversation like we are today. Today's sermon is going to be a little bit different. There's some science we'll get into, some biology we'll get into in today's sermon, talking about the brain and how these things work. But it all comes back to this. We said this a little bit ago with one of the sermon series we did. We were created for so much more. And I think we were created for more than addiction. Whatever addiction that may be that we're struggling with, I think we were created for more than that. So I think we can work together to work through that. I think if we're completely honest with ourselves, every single person in this room has spent time or is currently spending time running away from someone or something towards someone or something else to numb some sort of pain. I think we've been in that position that in our own lives at different points. Some of us, even right now, are in that position. We live in a culture that's so deeply distracted. And again, when we think about that word addiction, our minds drift to extreme images, don't they? When we talk about addiction, I think most of the time our minds drift to these extreme places, like someone with a needle in their arm, or a wrecked car on the nightly news, or a shattered marriage. When we think about addiction, I think that's where our mind often goes to. But here's what I want to begin with today is simply this. Addiction is a spectrum, and its roots are universal. I think we see addiction in different ways, in different places, and there is a complete spectrum. But its roots are all universal, and we're going to talk about that roots. For some, it's a chemical substance. We understand that. For others, it's, and this is where I begin to raise my hand, it's the dopamine chasing, scrolling through my smartphone. And the light that lights up, and I can sit in a room full of people that I love and can be completely mesmerized by the blue light in front of me. For others of us, it's things like compulsive shopping, workaholism. And yet others, it's turning to comfort food to silence our anxiety. It's the boxes of Amazon deliveries piling up day after day on the porch, ordered late at night just so that we can have that temporary rush of excitement. At its core, addiction thrives on isolation and secrecy, doesn't it? We don't want people to know about what we may be addicted to, so we take that addiction and we hide it away in a corner somewhere so that no one can see, no one can understand that when we're not in this place, we're living a life deeply marked by the secrecy and the isolation of our addiction. Our addiction often whispers lies into our ears. You're the only one who struggles with this. If people knew the real you, they wouldn't want to be around you. They'd leave you. They wouldn't come near you. So we hide and we build walls. The roots of addiction are universal, and it thrives in that isolation. But true freedom, lasting freedom, requires something that is so culture intuitive. It requires us to confess. It requires us to say that we are powerless. It requires us to turn over into the freeing power of Jesus Christ and his desire to break those chains, those bonds that hold us so tight in whatever addiction we're facing. And as we begin today, I just want to begin by saying this. I recognize addiction is real. I recognize addiction is real, and it's more than something, because we're going to talk about in a minute, it's a battle that happens within our mind, and there's more to it than just saying, well, we can just pray this away. I recognize today that there are some amazing community resources that I love, that we as a church actively support, giving up building space and saying, come, meet here for your AA, NA, whatever group that you need. We recognize that, and we give space to that because addiction is real. And for those of you who may not struggle with the same addiction as someone else, understand today, saying, why don't you just stop doing what you're doing, it's not effective. It doesn't work like that. I think for Christians, I think our first step in dealing with addiction in our own lives and to begin helping with addiction in other people's and supporting their struggle is to understand this battle that happens within. Have you ever felt like you're trapped in this cycle of bad habit and bad decision, destructive behaviors, flow-blowing addiction? You know that the agonizing pressure of saying, well, when I get up this morning, I'm not going to spend time on my phone unless I absolutely need to. And then when you go to bed at night, realizing how much time you spent on your phone. Or the defeat of going, I'm not going to take a drink today. And then the agonizing hurt of taking that drink. See, it's a real thing, and the Apostle Paul understood this. He got it. In Romans chapter 7, verse 15, and then later on, verse 18 and 19, he said this, I do not understand what I do. I love the transparency, by the way, that Paul speaks with here. And I try to be as vulnerable and transparent as possible up here because I recognize that Paul was vulnerable and transparent. And I love how he said this. I don't understand why I do what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do. But what I hate, that's what I do. Like he's so just, it throws it all on the table. For I have a desire to do what is good, but cannot carry it out. For I do not do the good that I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do, this I keep doing. Paul he's really, I think, capturing the exact mechanism of the human will. For centuries, people viewed addiction purely as a moral failure, a simple lack of willpower, or a character flaw, or simply just being a bad person. And honestly, I think when we think about ourselves, sometimes we've actually had those thoughts about other people who are struggling with addiction different than us. We've had those same things, but modern science has finally caught up with Scripture, has caught up with Paul here, revealing that addiction is both a sin struggle, but it's also a complex neurological battle. It's more than just a struggle with sin, and it's more than just a neurological battle. It's both those things together. It's not one or the other, it's absolutely both. Now, again, we're going to get some biology here because I think to understand why it's so hard to just stop, we have to look at how God designed our brains. We have a God who created us with such intricacies. It is absolutely astounding when you think about the human body. And the brain is our body as a whole is pretty amazing, but our brain alone is so fundamentally amazing on how God created it. Our brains are hardwired with a survival mechanism. It's called the reward pathway, driven primarily by a neurotransmitter called dopamine. Some of you know this. Some of you have heard about this. And I believe that God gave us dopamine to encourage healthy behavior. He wanted us to be encouraged by healthy behavior. When you eat a good meal, when you laugh with a friend, when you accomplish a goal at work, your brain releases those good, healthy amount, a splash of dopamine. It says this was good for our survival. Let's do this again. Let's remember this. Let's go through this again. However, addictive behaviors, substances, whether it's a drug or a drink or an explicit image or an algorithm, a casino, whatever that may be, they don't just release a splash of dopamine. It's not just giving you that little bit of dopamine to help remind you to do this again. It hits the brain like a tsunami. It absolutely hits the brain like a tsunami. And the flood the reward center gets is like 10 times more the amount than a normal pleasure would do it. Think of the difference between a soft, warm glow of a campfire and the blinding, destructive blast of a solar flare. Think about that for a minute. So when I was going to camp many years ago, we would sit around the campfire, right? And you sit there around the campfire and you get that normal heat that comes out of it, and it feels good. And sometimes you have to deal with the smoke. But overall, it feels good and it feels nice. And you can sit there, and some of you like to camp, and you sit there all night by a campfire talking with each other. We have this one guy at our camp. I'm not going to mention his name. He's here today. But he liked to blow stuff up, all right? And so he would throw stuff in the fire, and you get that big boom, right? But not just the boom, you would get the feeling, the heat that came off of it, right? And suddenly you're turning your back from it. You're turning around because the heat and the flames and the light, it was so huge and so big that you have to turn away because of how it's affecting you. This is what happens when we give in to those addictive behaviors, that dopamine just hits us hits us like coffee cream in a fire, like huge, and blasts us. This is what happens repeatedly. The brain enters a state of survival and adaptation through a process called neuroplasticity. This is the brain's ability to reshape itself based upon behavior. And what happens is, and again, I understand that this is going into the science, but I think it's really important that you understand how God created us. The brain realizes it's being overwhelmed by too much dopamine, so it defends itself by shutting down itself. It's like turning down the volume on a radio when it's played too loud. And the consequence is you don't get to hear the beautiful music anymore. You don't get to hear it. Normal, everyday joys, the beauty of a sunset, playing with your kids, a simple walk outside, they no longer bring you pleasure because your brain cannot physically connect the process with normal amounts of dopamine anymore. It's been turned down to this dull murmur. And the brain is really at war with itself because essentially what has happened is the brake line's been cut. And you can't slow down. And you can't stop. And you can't simply just because someone in church tells you don't do that anymore, not do it anymore. Chronic addiction is those wire cutters that erodes the gray matter in our prefrontal cortex and literally puts brakes on our brain. So when you ask yourself, and when Paul asked that question, why do I keep doing the very thing that I hate? And again, I think almost every single one of us in this room struggles with doing the very thing that we hate, don't we? Maybe it's our temper. Maybe it's our screen time. Maybe it's our constant lying over and over again. Why do we do the very thing we hate? Because you're experiencing a profound spiritual reality that has physically manifested itself in your biology. Your brain has been rewired to view the object of your addiction as a literal matter of life and death. It thinks that your substance or your behavior is necessary for your survival just as much as water or air. So what do we do with all this? How do we handle all this? Like, we can understand the biology, but how do we move forward this as Christians? The first is this. We look at the sin struggle. We look at the sin struggle. We look to creative things. Addiction is really based in these two areas. The sin struggle, where we look to creative things rather than the Creator, don't we? And then there's this neurological battle. Our bodies become conditioned to crave the counterfeit. Our bodies, absolutely. I love that Paul concludes this section of Scripture in Romans here in verse 24 by saying this: "What a wretched man am I? Who will rescue me from this body that is subject to death?" Notice that he says this: who will rescue me? He doesn't ask, how will I fix myself? He doesn't ask, how will I rewrite my brain? He says, who will fix me? Who will be able to do that? The answer isn't in greater willpower. The answer is in Jesus. Because the brain's brakes are compromised, its cycle repeats and repeats and repeats, and this toxic weight settles over our soul. And the enemy wants to keep us in that space. He wants to keep us isolated. He wants to keep our sin hidden. He wants to keep us as the only ones on our own dealing with our addictions, whatever that addiction may be. He wants to keep us dealing with it absolutely on our own. Isolation is his tactic. And what happens is our isolation leads to shame. It absolutely is a shame. I think shame is the primary weapon that the devil uses to keep us in our addiction. We have to make a distinction, by the way, between guilt and shame. All right? Guilt says, I did something bad. That's what guilt is. Guilt is saying, I did something bad. And guilt is a healthy conviction because it leads us into repentance. Shame is something different. Shame says, I am bad. Shame is toxic. It's a toxic identity that leads to hiding. When we carry our shame, our natural instinct is to do exactly what Adam and Eve did. You know what they did when they felt shame? They hid. They went back into isolation. They hid their bodies. They tried to hide from God, but you can't hide from God, can you? We try to manage our image. We put on our best clothes for church. We put on our best smile, our faces. Everything is fine. But internally, we're suffering through this addiction. Look at Proverbs 28, verse 13. It says this, whoever conceals their sin does not prosper, but the one who confesses and renounces them finds mercy. Notice the spiritual law at work here. Concealment halts spiritual growth. Secrets grow in the dark over and over again. How do we deal with the shame? I think we deal with the shame through what's called grace-based exposure. That's how we deal with the shame in our life. It means dragging our deepest, darkest secrets and putting them out in the light of God's grace. See, when you bring a hidden struggle to light in a safe, grace-filled environment, shame loses power. When you bring your hidden struggle out in that place, shame loses its power. Now you can get out of that isolation you've been living in because you can enter this place of grace-filled healing. The enemy can't blackmail you any longer with the threat of exposure, the threat of you better stay hidden because if people find out about this, they're not going to like you. They're not going to want to be with you. They're not going to want to be anywhere near with you. It brings us out of that place because you know what? It's already been exposed. We exposed it ourselves. We said, this is my struggle. This is what I'm dealing with. And we've done it in a place and a way that is grace-filled, where we feel safe because we know that we are surrounded by love. But once we step into that light, how do we stay there? Well, one of the things that is absolutely beautiful is that we have a God who can rewrite our brains even. I mean, that's how beautiful, how powerful our King is. He can do that. But I think it takes not just doing it on our own. We need to do it with other people. See, freedom from our bonds of sin, it's a community project. I didn't put this on the slide, but I want to say it one more time because I think it's important. Freedom from our bonds of sin, our bonds of addiction, our bonds of whatever is keeping us down, it's a community project. It's something we have to do together. It's something that's why I believe in things like AA and NA, because it puts somebody struggling with an addiction and it puts them in a place where they're surrounded in a grace-filled community, where they're surrounded by people who know and who can understand and who aren't going to simply just write a person off for exposing what they struggle with. And neither should the church. Neither should the church. The church should be a place where people can come with whatever addiction they're facing, whatever is going on in their life, and they can step into this place knowing that it's grace-filled and share that and bring it into the light. Because the bondage of addiction, getting released from that is a community project. Galatians 5:1, Paul writes this, it is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm in them and do not let yourselves be burdened again by the yoke of slavery. See, Christ paid the ultimate sin, or the ultimate price for our sin on the cross. And our chains are absolutely broken through him. But in order for us to walk out of that prison cell, it takes other people around us. I love watching movies when somebody, or a TV show when somebody gets out of prison. You know what happens? What's the first thing that happens when they get out of prison? Someone picks them up. Someone picks them up because they need a ride home or they need a ride to wherever they're going. It shows that from day one, when you get out of that prison, you need support and you need help of somebody else. And the same is true in our lives. The moment we get out of whatever we're dealing with, and listen, I know this room. And I know the addictions that some of you face, both whether it's through a chemical or whether it's addicted to things like not being truthful, or addicted to things like overspending, or addicted to other things. I know that this room struggles, but the first step is to step into that light because we can deal with it together. If we're grace-filled and loving with each other, we can help each other move past that. See, healthy communication, just like addiction rewrites our brain and isolation rewrites our brain for destruction, healthy communication rewrites our brain for connection. It absolutely builds us up together. This is why accountability structures within the church are really non-negotiable, just like they're non-negotiable in recovery. God never intended you to white knuckle through life on your own, to white knuckle through your struggles on your own. Our church needs to be a safe place for people who are struggling with any type of addiction to come and connect with other believers. That's what our church needs to be. Because we can provide two things. First of all is this: we can provide grace to heal. We can provide grace to heal. The fact of the matter is, we should be a Me Too church. And that when people come to us and say, I'm struggling, we can say, you know what, me too. I've been there. You're not alone. I've struggled with my own struggle too, and I get what it's like to struggle, and I can feel your pain, not because I may struggle with the same thing you do, because I've also struggled with whatever I struggled with. We need to be a Me Too church, giving people the grace to heal. But there's another thing we need to be. We need to provide people with truth to grow. People who we can come alongside and love so much that we don't want them to stay the same. We want to be a church full of people who can ask the people who are sitting in the pews around us hard questions, who hold steady our hand when our cravings begin to scream, because we're going to begin to provide people with the truth to grow. Church, the door to the prison is wide open. And as the band comes back up here and we get ready to close, I want to invite you to take your first step through it. And again, I don't know what your hidden struggle may be, but I'd love for you to take the first step of confessing it and sharing it with one trusted person. Look at this room around you. We got plenty of people. I think we got 80-some people here today. Plenty of people. And then there's probably 80 more who aren't here today that you can share something with. One trusted person that you know is going to provide you that grace-filled space. But to be able to have somebody to pick you up outside that prison door and give you that ride home and help you do life so you don't end up in that same spot over and over again. You don't have to tell everyone, but tell somebody. Tell somebody and let God's grace continue to move in your life. Remember, isolation is where addiction and sin grow. But a healthy community rewrites our brain. Let's stand together as we reflect this morning.